Welcome to another edition of Palm Beach County Naturescope. I'm Steve Bass, your host. To many of us, the success of an outing is really heightened when we can say, we saw a deer. Here in Florida, there are lots of white-tailed deer, and they're, of course, a native species in our state. And there's one place here in Palm Beach County that you can go to really heighten your chances of seeing a deer on a family outing. And that's Okeeheelee Nature Center. That's where our Naturescope cameras have come today. And the subject is white-tailed deer. And here to talk with us about that and help us to understand Florida whitetails better is Donald Campbell, naturalist at Okeeheelee. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. You know, I think maybe for the benefit of our viewers, we should talk a little bit just about deer in general. Deer are mammals, of course, because they have hair and they nurse their young. But aside from that, how can we kind of narrow it down a little bit?
That's actually a really good question. Like you said, deer are mammals. Deer also are broken down into categories as classifications as class, order, family, genus, species, and they are in the family what is called Cervidae, which are antlered species of animals, such as the elk, the caribou, and the moose. Also a characteristic of deer are that they are what are called ruminants. In other words, they have the four-chambered stomach and they chew their cud. Deer, as we said before, have antlers, which differentiates them from other animals like cows that have horns, right. Goats that have horns.
You know, you often hear people referring to the head ornamentation of deer as horns, but that's really wrong, isn't it?
That's correct. And actually what I've brought with me, or what we have today, which we did find out here in our deer yard when one of the bucks was kind enough to place it right in the middle for us when we brought him his food, jokingly, is an antler. And antlers are different from horns in that these are shed annually. These grow on the males and they fall off each year. Antlers are true bone, so when you feel an antler, it's very, very hard. Antlers, unlike true bone, unlike other mammal bones, are solid all the way through, and they lack the marrow that other bones have. Something that's interesting about the antlers, which hopefully we'll see with our herd today, is that it is one of the fastest forms of tissue growth known to man. They have been known to grow as much as ½ an inch in one day.
Mm-hmm. So these antlers have to grow every year on a male. Only the males have antlers,
correct.
Right?
Only the males.
And they have to grow them in a relatively short period of time.
That's correct. Generally, the antlers, when the male drops his antlers, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks later, the antler growth starts. And you're right, they have to have those antlers growing by the time that what is called the rutting season comes about. So hopefully those males are able to defend a territory or compete against other males for a female.
I noticed earlier when we were looking at the deer herd that the males in the deer herd right now are what we call in velvet. What's going on now? The antler shape is there, but it's not like the antler that we're holding right here. It's covered with a kind of fur. So what's going on?
That's correct. Like you said, it's a kind of fur, actually a kind of skin, which has blood vessels. There is tissue growth actually being put down under there, and like I said, it can grow as much as ½ an inch in one day. At this time of the development of the antler, they are very fragile. They could be broken off. They could be damaged. What does happen eventually in the photo period, as with most animals, is plays a very important role. It will trigger, as the daylight hours get longer, it will trigger the pituitary gland in the buck to put down these calcium salts, which you can see at the base of this antler form what's called the burr when it pushes it out. And when that burr is formed, it will constrict the vessels, so no more blood is going into there. And the antlers will start to harden.
Okay, so day length or photo period is what causes the antler to start to grow, and really controls all parts of the antler growth.
That's correct. It controls all parts of the antler growth, and it's basically what runs the life cycle of the deer, females and males.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the feet of the deer. I think maybe you have a deer, some deer hoofs there, a deer foot. Noticing now we have two a hoof. So this is unlike a horse, for example,
Correct.
which has one hoof. The deer have two hooves, and these are actually toes, right?
Yes, these are actually toes. Like you said, these are toes, elongated nails here. So the deer itself is actually walking on. If my hand was the deer's foot, and at one time scientists have found evidence that deer, long time ago, actually had 5 toes. And what happened, because the earth is always changing, that as more grasslands and as more plains developed, the deer were more in the open and had to develop a way to escape predation. So what happened is, if my hand is the deer's foot, the thumb was lost. The 2 outer fingers here, or toes, basically shrunk up, became what are called vestigial splints, or what we call the dew claws now. These 2 middle ones, again, elongated, the nails elongated, and now that is what the deer moves upon. It gives it great agility. It can reach speeds up to 35 miles an hour.
So when humans talk about stay on your toes, the deer is permanently in that situation.
Correct. The deer is permanently in that situation, and this is something that, like we said before, as the earth was changing, if they didn't change with it, we wouldn't see deer as we do today.
Well, they're certainly fast, and of course their speed enables them to get away from predators. And you know, we call them white-tailed deer, and that's, I think, one other thing I wanted to get to with you, just as an introduction. That prominent tail as they're moving away from a predator, does that serve any function at all?
You know, that's a very good question. Like you said, we do call them white-tailed deer, and what the tail does, and they call it flagging when the tail goes up, what the tail does do is it lets the other deer in the vicinity, or in that herd, or in that immediate area, know that there is a situation of some sorts, and to be on alert. What scientists also speculate it does is, when that tail goes up, the deer is also letting the predator know, I've spotted you, don't waste your time coming after me, it's not worth it, I know that you're there, so just keep your distance. And so they actually think it serves a dual purpose.
White-tailed deer have their young in the spring. They're seasonal births. And I know that in the deer herd here at Okeeheelee, at this particular time of the year, we've already had at least one birth. So we're going to be able to see that. Most folks know that young deer, when they're first born, spotted. And I guess that would be for camouflage?
That's correct. You know, one thing that I never understood when I was younger is, you know, I can see a zebra with all its stripes and things like that, and I can see a deer up close when the fawn has its spots. But in actuality, what that does serve in nature is that when you're breaking up any type of solid pattern, whether it be with spots, whether it be with different colors, whether it would be with stripes on a zebra, it does create a better camouflage. Think about the fatigues that people in the military wear. They don't have one solid color of green or gray. They have many colors blended in, so they're breaking up. They don't blend in with any type of background.
And within, what, a year or so, the young will get that sort of reddish brownish color that the adults have.
Correct. As with other animals, like panthers have spots actually when they're born, and as they mature, as they age, they will lose those. Correct.
We're going to take a little break right now, but when we return, my co-host Mary Ridler and Donald are going to continue this discussion of the natural history of white-tailed deer. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Palm Beach County Naturescope. I'm Mary Ridler, and today we're here talking with Donald at Okeeheelee Nature Center. We're talking about white-tailed deer. And as we're talking, I see some of them running in the background. We just put their food out for them. Donald, a little bit earlier you were speaking with Steve, talking about white-tailed deer and a couple of their appearances. When I look at the white-tailed deer, I notice that there's a difference between the males and the females. What exactly would some of those differences be?
Well, obviously the main thing that you would look for would be the antlers as far as males and females, but obviously the males don't have the antlers all year round. So size would be the next physical appearance that you would look for. And the males are considerably bigger than the females in in their range. Now, if you went further north, you would find female deer that would be bigger than the male deer down here. But as far as a certain geographic range, the males are going to be larger, correct?
Now, the next question I have is, here in Florida, we have the white-tailed deer, but we also have key deer. What's the difference?
Honestly, the only difference is that they are what are called different subspecies. The white-tailed deer itself, Okeeheelee virginianus, is the white-tailed deer in the United States. There are 17 subspecies in the United States of white-tailed deer, one of which is the Florida white-tailed deer, and one of which is the key deer. Something that's really unique about the distribution of the deer themselves throughout the United States is that the further north you go, the deer like the Dakota whitetail and the northern whitetail are much, much larger than the deer as you move further south. So you can look at the key deer, which, like you said before, are white-tailed deer, just a different subspecies, but you'd never know that by the size differential between them and their relatives to the north.
Interesting, interesting. I think some of them have come up to feed right now. That brings up the next question. Here we have feed bowls out for them. What would the natural diet be for white-tailed deer?
That's another good question. The natural diet for white-tailed deer, again, would differentiate a little bit from geographic range to geographic range as to what they have available to them, and also during the seasons. In the fall, there would be certain plants that would be blooming or producing seeds or fruit for them in the winter, spring, and summer. Out in our natural plant community that we have out here, the pine flatwoods, which you would find them feeding on, and if you look around, you'll see that they feed on the saw palmetto fronds. There is grass that's been cropped very close to the ground. They would feed on flowers such as asters, dandelions. They would even feed on poison ivy. So something like poison ivy, which we think of doesn't have any use to us because of how it affects most people, is very important to other animals such as white-tailed deer. Acorns, things like that. In other areas of the country where they're found, they get into the apple orchards and things like that. So they have a wide variety to their diet, and a lot of it is dependent upon seasonality.
Now, you supplement their diet. What exactly do you supplement them with?
We supplement their diet with a deer chow or a deer feed, which is approximately 18 to 20% protein. We also add some corn to it, so they're getting some carbohydrates, especially in the wintertime when it's colder. The carbohydrates will help them produce a little more heat. We also provide some alfalfa hay for the deer, and we also provide mineral licks or mineral blocks for them so they can get nutrients that possibly they would be lacking in this area or not being able to get because there are so many deer in this area, in this enclosure, and maybe not enough food to go around.
Now, you mentioned how many deer. How many deer do you have in this enclosure?
We have 17 deer which are at least a year old, and we just had a fawn that was recently born, so that would make 18, but 17 that are of mature size.
Okay, and how large of an enclosure do you have here?
The enclosure here at the Nature Center is approximately 6 acres. So it's a fairly large enclosure as far as people would think of owning property or having land, but when you have a herd the size of 17 or 18 deer now that we have, and especially on a type of habitat like this pine flatwoods, which doesn't necessarily provide the most nutritious of feed sources, this particular type of area would not be able to support that many deer unless we did supplement their diet.
Do you happen to know what the population of white-tailed deer is within the state of Florida?
Well, I can tell you that as of 1977 or so, the population was approximately 500,000. Now it's estimated to be over 1 million.
Really? Is that due to conservation efforts, or?
A lot of it is due to conservation efforts. I mean, obviously we have a regulated or a permitted hunting season. We have stipulations on, even during the hunting season, what types of deer can be taken and what can't. But also a lot of it is due to what the deer have to eat now. In certain ranges where they're found, such as an area like this wouldn't be the most nutritious of ranges, so the deer might not thrive as well as they would in an area where they could get into a cornfield or an alfalfa field or an apple orchard. So as times have changed and we've come along with agriculture and stuff, it's provided a much better food source for a lot of the deer also, so they just continue to do very well.
Now, the deer that you have here at Okeeheelee, how exactly did they come to be here at Okeeheelee?
Well, the deer originally, and this is from many years ago, we started out with one deer originally, and unfortunately she's not over by us right now. I think she's feeding, and that is Daisy. She was actually an orphan, and she was hand-raised by a member of the Parks and Recreation Department who provided a small enclosure for her. And over the years, they brought in deer when Game and Fish would find some orphan deer or confiscate some deer that people might have had. This enclosure obviously was increased to its size of 6 acres, and that's how our population started. So we started with varying gene pools also.
Well, that's good. Now, I know different things come through the wires from Fish and Game, and one of it that I think I received last week was on conservation efforts dealing with just the white-tailed deer. And one thing that they're concerned with that maybe you see some of is people that all of a sudden call you and say, I have a baby deer, I can't find its mother. Do you ever get that?
Fortunately, at least I haven't answered one of those phone calls here, but I'm sure that the Nature Center itself has. And like you said, I know people in your area also receive those types of phone calls. And it's kind of funny because obviously as people, we want to do the right thing. We see a baby, we think of a human child being orphaned, and obviously the parent needs to be there for that child to survive. And the same is true with the white-tailed deer. They do need their mother for nursing purposes. But the mother leaves the baby, leaves the fawn intentionally. She will be off feeding. The fawn will stay bedded down in an area, camouflaging itself from predators, not moving at all, waiting for the mother either to give a signal for it to come out or to go over and locate the fawn. I know that when we first came in here and were setting up that you and I both saw the fawn in here with the herd. And then later on, and even now with them back there, some of the herd, you don't see the fawn anywhere in sight.
Right. Now, what would be the best thing to do if you got somebody that called you and said, I have a baby deer? What would you encourage that person to do?
I would encourage the person, probably since they've taken it from the area that it was located now, and there's probably a chance that, a better of a chance that it's not going to be able to be reunited with its parent, probably to contact the Game and Fish Commission, or even contact the facility like the Bush Wildlife Sanctuary would be a good place also, some type of rehabilitation facility.
Great. Well, Donald, I think we're going to take a break here, and you and Steve are going to come back and talk a little bit more about white-tailed deer. Stay tuned.
We're back at Okeeheelee Nature Center with naturalist and deer manager Donald Campbell. Donald, the herd that you have here at Okeeheelee is really not under totally natural conditions. But I'm wondering what kind of behaviors that you see from the deer that are natural behaviors. I know they're in a forested area here. For example, when it comes time for the males to go into rut, do you see them in that behavior?
That's a very good question. Yes, you do, Steve. If we had the ability to have a moving camera and walk around this enclosure right now, we would see several signs of the males when they are in the rut. You would see scrapings on the ground. You would see rubbings on the trees, especially smaller saplings. That would let us know that males are either getting the velvet off their antlers or making their presence known, and also the scrapings on the ground represent them trying to mark their territory also. So you do definitely see that. One thing that people always assume is that the antlers a deer uses is for protection from like predators. And in actuality, it's mainly for the breeding season, because the antlers, soon after the breeding season is over, they fall off. And in more northern latitudes, that's the worst time that could happen for the deer. The snow's really deep, they're very vulnerable to predators and things at that time. So that would be a good indicator that the antlers are more for the rutting and for competing with other males for the females than they actually are for protection.
Now, when the males go out and scrape the trees, and I've seen just what you're talking about here in the enclosure, do they also leave around some scent?
That's a good question. There are several glands all over the deer's body, and like you said, when they're up there at the rubbing on the trees, on their head there are glands. They will They will urinate on the ground or in the scrapings, so they are making themselves known, and correct, they will do that. The females also, during the breeding season they will urinate on their hocks, on the back parts of their legs, so the males are easier to pick up the scent of the females. So there's a lot of, like you said, they are leaving scents when they're rubbing the trees, and sometimes they will urinate in the scrapings also to leave a scent.
All of this natural behavior and the sort of natural environment here make this an excellent place to observe white-tailed deer for our viewers, for residents of Palm Beach County. And we're gonna come back to that and tell our viewers how they can come out here and view the deer. Now, you and Mary talked a little bit about what the deer eat here in the enclosure, and you supplement their food. You also give them mineral supplements. With all this great treatment, is the deer herd growing?
Yes, it is growing. We've, like we mentioned earlier, we do have a new addition to the herd. We have a baby fawn. We also have at least one other doe that is expecting. She's very close to dropping her fawn. So the deer herd is doing very well. Last year, before the birthing season, we had 13. We have 17, now we have 18, and we're expecting more. So like you said, with all the supplementing that we're doing, the deer are very healthy. They are going through their normal behavioral patterns, and their herd is growing.
Donald, with all the great nutrition and with the increase that you've had, obviously you're going to get to a point in the future where you've got just too many deer for the enclosure.
That's correct, Steve. In any type of environment, especially a contained enclosure, you can eventually reach a number of individuals that will exceed what that area is able to provide them in the way of food, in the way of shelter, in the way of water, in the way of everything they need to survive. And if we did not supplement the deer with the food that we do and the mineral blocks that we do, we would already see that happening, that we would have well exceeded that. But definitely we could still reach that even with supplementing them, yes.
And when you get to that point, when you really just have too many deer for the area, what have you thought about what your plans would be?
Yeah. One of the plans that we as a staff here have discussed with our manager is that one of the options would be, first of all, to thin the herd, removing some deer and transferring them to other facilities that use white-tailed deer also. Maybe get our herd size down to a manageable 9 or 10 deer, keep a couple of the bucks, the rest would be females. We would most likely perform vasectomies on the male bucks. So you would allow them to still go through their life cycle. They would still have the testosterone and all. They would just be sterile, not be able to impregnate the females, and the herd would remain the same. And then if the herd did drop off, we might bring some new additions in. One
of the things that impresses me about the behavior of the animals as we're out here is how shy they are. Obviously the crew and our presence here has really got them keeping their distance. So do you think it would be possible that they might go wild?
You know what, there's a good chance with all of them, but definitely one, Daisy, who unfortunately we didn't have a chance to get live on camera with us today, but if people could have seen her before, she was all over us. The one that we spoke about earlier that was bottle fed. But I think there is a chance because, like you said, they are very shy. They do keep their distance, and especially if they were let go with a wild herd, there's a good chance that they could learn the behavior to keep an even greater distance from individuals. So they would definitely, that would be something that could possibly happen if they were put in with the right environment, with another herd. But on their own, and not learning from another herd, there's a good chance that they may not be able to do well on their own.
And of course, I think we have to say too that there are agencies and other facilities in the state that really might serve as helpers to make that kind of release, or as new homes for the deer themselves.
That's correct, and that's one of the places that we would, or those are the types of places that we would look to sending our deer if we were thinning our herd. Correct.
Now let's talk a little bit about your deer program here at Okeeheelee, from an educational point of view. I know that behind us is an overlook that visitors to Okeeheelee can come to just as they walk around the trails. If a visitor were to come to Okeeheelee and stop by the deer overlook, is there a good chance they might see deer?
There's a fairly good chance they would see the deer. It would have to be at the right time of the day. We do have a timed control feeder that disperses corn 4 times during the day. We do feed the deer in the morning. They are more active at certain times of the days than others. So there is a good chance, but you know, the odds are probably a little less than 50-50,
Okay.
which makes it special when you do see them.
Right. Now, in terms of special programs, I understand that you do have special programs for folks that really want to get up close with the whitetails. And how does that work?
Well, once a month, and during the season that the deers are not in rut, so as long as the antlers are, the breeding season is going on and the deers are, and the males are still holding on to their hard antlers, not when they're in velvet, we offer individuals an opportunity to come out with a naturalist into the deer pen, get a chance to see a herd a lot closer than you ever would most likely in the wild. We limit it to 10 people because we do want to keep the stress on the animals down. We also limit it to children that are 12 years and older because we do want it to be an educational experience. And unfortunately, with some of the younger ones, you know, they may tend to make a little more noise than we want them to do.
Now, if folks who are watching wanted to try to set that up, they should call the Nature Center?
Yes, sir. They could reach us at 233-1400 and speak to anybody on staff about registering or picking up a schedule of our programs.
Well, that's great. And as I see out of the corner of my eye, more of the deer herd are joining us back here at the feeders. So I think we can end with that. Donald, it's been a very, very educational experience for Mary and for me, and we appreciate your helping us out on Naturescope today.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And thanks to you for joining us. For my co-host Mary Riddler and Donald Campbell and all the staff at Okeeheelee, join us again on Palm Beach County Naturescope.